FBI agents took journalists into custody, citing undisclosed federal charges stemming from a protest at a Minnesota church. Civil rights advocates call the move an alarming escalation by the administration, saying it signals an unconstitutional crackdown on journalists and free speech. The arrests have sparked more protests in Minneapolis as people question whether this is legitimate law enforcement or an overreach of executive power. And joining us to discuss tonight is Assistant Professor of Law at Seattle University, Erin Carr. Erin, thanks for being with us. Great to see you.
Thanks for including me in tonight's conversation.
So first, what are the biggest legal questions raised by these arrests of Lemon and Fort?
Well, this question alone could easily dominate our entire conversation. The legal concerns implicated in the arrest of two journalists for doing their jobs extends beyond the obvious and troubling disregard for First Amendment protections for free speech, assembly, and the press. Today's arrests also raise serious questions about the use of government power to target and criminally prosecute individuals perceived as enemies of the administration. The background of these arrests is important. These arrests were authorized by Attorney General Pam Bondi after two separate federal judges refused to approve a criminal complaint, finding that the government had failed to satisfy its very low evidentiary burden that there was sufficient probable cause for these arrests. And today's arrest at the personal direction of the Attorney General also followed several recent statements by the president, including one calling for Lemon's imprisonment. The Department of Justice's decision to pursue legal action in this case, at the request of the president and in opposition to judicial determinations that there were insufficient grounds to do so, is consistent with an emerging and alarming pattern in which the president announces or suggests his desire for a specific person who has opposed or aggrieved him to be criminally investigated or charged with a crime, and the Attorney General, using the full power of the federal government, swiftly complies.
And Erin, you kind of touched on this, but critics are saying that these arrests really reflect an expansion of unconstitutional action by the Trump administration as a whole. What constitutional protections do you potentially see at risk here?
Well, these arrests are not an isolated constitutional violation by this administration. The targeting of journalists by the government should be seen and must be understood in a broader context of what appears to be the collapse of constitutional protections by an administration that has selectively and punitively leveraged the power of the national government to quell dissent. Focusing solely on the constitutional violations in Minneapolis in the past month alone, the government has been accused in multiple court filings, many of which have been substantiated in court orders, of violating the Fourth Amendment's prohibition against illegal search and seizure by entering the homes of people and arresting them without warrants, as well as conducting unreasonable traffic stops using excessive force. The federal government is also testing the bounds of the Fourth Amendment with its use of facial recognition technology to learn the identities of protesters and track their locations. There are additional First and Fourth Amendment issues with the unreasonable use of deadly force and the killing of U.S. citizens who do not agree with the government's anti-immigrant policies. The evidence and video footage documenting the conduct of federal agents also suggests that the due process and equal protection guarantees of the Constitution seemingly no longer apply to certain individuals in certain parts of the country. And this is far from an exhaustive list of unconstitutional conduct by this administration.
Erin, if we focus in, though, on just today and what has happened with these journalists, how do the courts decide if this kind of federal law enforcement crosses the line from legitimate into unlawful, perhaps retaliation against the press?
Well, this is an issue that courts have rarely had to decide because we have had a tradition in this country of freedom of press in which reporters have rarely been arrested. Journalists have occasionally been jailed for contempt when they've refused to disclose or testify about their sources, but generally prosecutors have not sought charges against reporters who are present at a demonstration where there are arrests. However, because press arrests have increased over the first year of the second Trump administration, this is an issue that courts will be presented with, but it's not a constitutionally complex issue to decide. Since mid-December, there have been at least 32 instances of journalists being detained or charged. Roughly 90% of those recent arrests and detentions occurred while journalists were covering anti-government demonstrations, and nearly all of those journalists were released without charges or had their charges subsequently dropped.
Erin, we have so many more questions for you, but our time is out. I want to thank you for being with us tonight and shedding some light on what's happening there in Minneapolis. And of course, we will be watching those cases closely. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jessica.